Well, welcome everyone to our August webinar. I am delighted today to be hosting Shelli Pavone, CEO and co-founder of Enlightened, Dyan Bryson, a patient engagement strategist from Inspired Health Strategies, and Kevin Ban, Chief Medical Officer at Walgreens. We have a really exciting and important conversation today talking about how critical it is to source diverse expertise in healthcare innovation. And as healthcare innovation is what we're all about here at Dyan, thank you, Kevin, Dyan, and Shelli for being with us today. Quickly, for folks on the line who may not have joined us for a webinar before, let me just run through very quickly some housekeeping. Hang on one second here, I jumped ahead just a little bit. We are, just so everyone's aware, we are recording today's session, and both recording and slides will be available after the session. We endeavor to get those posted to our website within 24 hours in case you'd like to share with colleagues. What I'll do is I'll keep everyone on mute apart from our presenters as they run through their terrific presentation they have planned for us today. And then as we come to the end, I'll moderate questions. There's a couple of ways that you can ask questions directly of our experts today. You can raise your hand and I'll unmute you or call on you. You're also very welcome to use the chat function or the Q&A if you're situated somewhere where it might be challenging to speak. So with that, let me hand over to our guests. And Shelli, I think you might be kicking us off today.
So I'm Shelli Pavone, the CEO and co-founder of Enlightened. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about sourcing diverse expertise in healthcare innovation. And I'm super excited to be joined by Dyan and Kevin today. I'll let each of them introduce themselves briefly.
Okay, I guess I'll start. Dyan Bryson, patient engagement strategist. I have been in pharma for more than 30 years, doing the traditional sales leadership and marketing roles, launching brands and all that, but I spent the last 15 years really focused on helping the industry put the patient at the center.
Great, thanks Dyan, thanks Shelli. My name is Kevin Ban. I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer at Walgreens. My career started as a resident in Boston at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where I stayed on as academic faculty, got involved in a lot of different initiatives, many innovative new initiatives that we started, and then became Chief Medical Officer within the BIDMC system. Later joined Athena Health to lead the population health division, and then became Chief Medical Officer there before joining Walgreens, which was only in January of this year. And so you can imagine it's been a bit of baptism by fire because COVID set in not too long after I started, but it's been a great experience.
Excellent. Jen, if you want to go ahead and move on to just a couple of slides forward here. And you can, yep, you can go right to the, yeah, absolutely. Okay, perfect, thank you. So 96% of healthcare innovations fail. And I know I'm opening this up with a little bit of sensationalism here, but it's a very high number. And it is true that a lot of innovations in general industries fail as well. But healthcare is unique because I think within healthcare, if you look at other industries and their failure rates, there are a lot of reasons for that. And it's very difficult to contribute specific things to the failure of general innovations. But in healthcare, there are many common denominators, and most of them truly have to do with the knowledge gap between industry and innovators, and those on the front lines of delivering care. You know, innovators in healthcare, they don't often have the special expertise that they truly need in order to disrupt an incredibly complex industry and to truly understand the systemic issues within healthcare. Innovators, you know, have the best of intentions, but I think that it's oftentimes overlooked how truly difficult it is to be an expert in every area of healthcare. You know, even people that have worked in healthcare for their entire careers have specific areas where they can go very deep in the knowledge, but none of them are an expert in every single piece of healthcare. And for innovators, it is really challenging and expensive and also time consuming to obtain the right quality subject matter expertise in the healthcare field. Many entrepreneurs in healthcare underestimate the problem that they're trying to solve and the resources and input from true experts in the field that they need. And ultimately, they don't source enough diverse perspectives. And in turn, a lack of diverse opinions and low access to diverse patient populations contributes to a lot of bias being built in the tools. All these things combined with the fact that entrepreneurs are often really passionate about their ideas, they can lose objectivity, and we end up with solutions that truly don't satisfy the needs of multiple stakeholders. I think in healthcare, we really need excited entrepreneurs. We need those people who are going to kind of buck tradition and try to solve difficult problems, but it's really important that they dig in and source the right expertise in order to do so. And they have to really go deep with that expertise and truly understand the systemic issues within healthcare to be able to be successful and get the right innovations to the right stakeholders and, of course, to the patients as well. So we spoke to a lot of innovators, understanding the problems, dove a little bit deep to determine what the exact issues are within healthcare, why they're failing. And Jen, if you could go to the next slide. And so once we spoke with the innovators, we started speaking with clinicians. And we started to interview clinicians to really get a clear understanding of their thoughts around healthcare innovation and how has it really served them. And certainly there were some positive stories, but we had an overwhelmingly heard stories of frustration with clinicians. And I expected some of these things, but the numbers were a lot higher than we had initially anticipated. 77% of clinicians said investments in healthcare are not aligned with the needs of healthcare professionals. 79% said innovation needed to engage the clinical community earlier. 75% said that healthcare companies do not understand their challenges, which is huge. 44% of physicians suffer at least one symptom of physician burnout, and we know that unfortunately, recent innovations like the EMR have contributed significantly to physician burnout. We need to start creating innovations that are going to help, ease that and help clinicians do their job and provide better outcomes to patients without adding more work to the workflow there. Only 25% said that recent healthcare innovations have positively impacted their practice. We're doing so much work to innovate in healthcare. This is an extremely low number to see a positive impact. And 72% think that companies don't have the expertise that they need to disrupt responsibly. Again, really unfortunate. There are a lot of considerations within healthcare that differ from many industries, and we have to be able to source the right expertise to be able to disrupt responsibly. And this on a positive note, clinicians do want to leverage their expertise to shape the future of healthcare, and they're very excited to do so. We've spoken with so many clinicians who are incredibly positive about the future of healthcare, and they want to be able to dig in and to help entrepreneurs impact healthcare. Jen, if you can go to the next slide. So speaking of, again, responsible disruption, one of the biggest drivers of disruption in healthcare is actually the patients. People are beginning to demand the same level of innovation, service, and quality from their health service providers that they see in other service sectors, online shopping, travel, media. Patients in the broader community are increasingly demanding better service and care, but they have to be able to trust that innovators in healthcare are well vetted and they execute these innovations responsibly. It's really important to engage experts to ensure that. Again, there are special considerations in healthcare. Health systems and providers are not necessarily amenable and adaptable to disruptive change. We have to go about it differently. There's a ton of compliance and regulation in the healthcare industry, and when patient safety is at stake, we can't go by the typical Silicon Valley motto of move fast and break things. We have to really be considerate that people's lives are at stake, and responsible disruption in this space is very much needed. Go to the next slide, please. And again, back to the positive piece. Clinicians are eager to engage. They really want to leverage their expertise to shape the future of healthcare. Clinicians spend countless years in school and training. They continue their training throughout their career. They're on the front lines of providing care every day, and they're truly driven to improve that patient care. They want to be involved in decisions around new solutions. You know, that includes the design and development, organization selection and implementation. And so, you know, not engaging the clinical community early and often is really a miss for entrepreneurs. Healthcare innovation cannot happen without clinician insights. And I think that innovators who do source expertise from clinicians early and often have a much better understanding of clinical workflows, challenges, and preferences of the audience that they're intending to serve. But those are some of the issues that we're seeing, that we have feedback from the entrepreneurial community as well as clinicians. And I think the focus now is really, how do we move forward? What are we going to do to actually bridge this knowledge gap? And I'll now hand it over to Kevin Ban. Again, Kevin introduced himself. He's a physician executive whose career has spanned patient care and industry leadership. And Kevin will really dig deeper into the conversation of engaging clinicians and how we can really bridge that knowledge gap.
Great, thanks, Shelli. You know, what I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes or so here is really just make a few points to you. And Jen, go ahead to the next slide. You know, number one, I kind of want to really make the point that diversity of opinion matters. Whether you are a small startup company or whether or not you're a larger organization, it really matters that you have diversity of opinion. It's perhaps, and I'll go more deeply into this, one of the most fundamental components of innovation. Second piece I'd like to get into is that solutions just have to solve real problems. When I was chief medical officer within the BIDMC system, on several occasions, vendors would come in and talk to me, and right away they'd be telling me about their solution. And then I'd stop them and I'd sort of say, hey, here are the three things that I wake up every day thinking about. How does your solution address those three things? And that type of frame, or that way to approach these healthcare professionals, is fundamental. And so you need to know what they're thinking about. And not only, I want to make the case that understanding their workflow is very important as well. And then lastly, I'll end by trying to offer some, let's call them suggestions, tips, some pointers on what you might do to be successful. So with that, Jen, let's go to the next slide. And here what I'd like to call out is, it really matters to have the right expertise. Now, we're focusing here on healthcare professionals and what type of expertise they can bring, but I really would encourage everyone to think about what is the diverse and broad spectrum of point of view that you need to make your solution successful. And I would suggest that that is not only healthcare professionals, but also who are the people that it's serving. So later we'll have Dyan lean really into the patient point of view, and Shelli's already mentioned it, but it's fundamental that you understand what type of problems that people want solved for them. I say this jokingly by thinking back to the conversion from horse-pulled wagons to cars. If we had put horses in charge of that transition, we would all be driving around in really nice wagons these days. You know, so disruption's necessary, but disruption in a vacuum is likely really to go nowhere. The other thing that I'll caution you here too is that inevitably there is a move towards groupthink. And this is something I try to remind myself all the time about, that as we work more closely together collectively, we tend to influence each other in the same direction, such that you're really not getting diversity of opinion. You're mostly just getting your opinion put back, maybe in different words. And that feels good, but it's often not the best way to disrupt what you're currently doing. And then lastly, I'll end by saying that there's a great deal of nuance that goes into the decisions that you're making. And then those decisions will change as your business grows or as the project initiative proceeds. And so having the ability to lean into a diverse network of people, some of whom will be the right people in their early stages, and then others who may be helpful later, is really valuable. And that's what I liked about Enlightened, that you are able to get what you need in that moment, and you're able to get diversity of opinion. And with that, Jen, let's go to the next slide. I'd like to lean a little bit more deeply into diversity as it pertains to innovation. And without question, there is much research. There are studies that have shown us that, you know, and I have to stop for a second, hit the pause button and saying, especially now in this moment of social justice, and as we think about how to be more inclusive, this is a wonderful moment to say, hey, because we're going to have much better outcomes when we get diverse points of views from different people. They can be different stakeholders, as I've already mentioned. They could be physicians, they could be patients, they could be administrators, but even people with diverse backgrounds. I'm always interested in that because we know that it drives better innovation, better growth, better outcomes. And I think that's what all of you want. And Shelli talked about this a little bit earlier, is it's a way to avoid bias. It's inevitable that you are subject to bias within your organization. The other thing I should mention is I always made a point of it, that even after I left the traditional world of academics, that I continued to practice medicine. And I did that successfully for 24 years because I thought that it would inform me and I wouldn't get too far from the point of care where things happen. For people who care about lean initiatives, it's called going to Gemba. And there is nothing more rich than going to Gemba. Now, I violated my own rules because after 24 years of practicing medicine last fall, I put it on pause so that I could join Walgreens. The job was pretty, it requires a lot of my time. Not to mention, I live in Boston and we're headquartered in Chicago. So I'm careful to remember that it's easy to get away from the real problems that people are trying to solve every day, and that they have workflows within which they have to work. Now, the other piece about diversity is just the concept, and I'll put it in parentheses, the capital T truth. How do we get to the truth, if there is such a thing? And I believe probably the best way to get there is through triangulation, made popular by Woodward and Bernstein back in the Watergate days. You know, if you hear it from one person, you have an opinion. If you hear it from two people, well, maybe we're going in the right direction. But when you hear three people who are independent of one another confirm something, you start to think this is capital T truth, again, in parentheses, if we have such a thing. So I think that concept of being mindful of your blind spots, understanding that groupthink is a thing, and that you're going to build bias into your decision making, the idea of trying to pull your head up out of those weeds and trying to understand the full picture is really an important component. Jen, go ahead on to the next slide. And so here you just get a sense that that diversity matters, you know, and if you have more diversity within your organization, you're going to drive better outcomes. And I think nothing could be more important as we think about this in 2020 and moving forward. Jen, next slide. Now, what about adoption adopting a new solution? What does that look like? And here I would say that, again, I want to come back to the whole concept that, you know, physicians, healthcare professionals, you have to address their concerns. Now, I know you have a solution, but if that solution acts independently of the problems that people are trying to solve, whether it be patients, whether it be healthcare professionals, whether it be administrators, then it's going to land on deaf ears. And not only, as I mentioned, it has to fit into the whole process that they're working with. I'll give you a really simple example. I remember because my career has been in Boston, and there's a lot of innovation that happens in this part of the country. I would be available to early startup companies and give them some, some feedback. Did that mostly because I was curious about what they're doing and never really asked for anything in return. Inevitably, they would open up this really spectacular solution, and I would stop them and I would say, okay, wait, you just opened that solution. How did you do that? And they're like, well, I just clicked on this app. And I said, no. That there has to be single sign-on. The Italians have a saying, I know my chickens, and I know my chickens. My chickens will not remember their username and password for 5 different solutions. My chickens want to have single sign-on, and they want to be able to seamlessly access whatever technology is in one space. That's the problem you have to solve. I'm not even interested in how fabulous your solution is if our doctors are not going to see it immediately as they open up. So that's a simple piece of feedback that I don't think most young technologists would even consider, but I can tell you it'll prevent something from working. Now, decisions need to include physicians and they need to include patients, as I mentioned. But it is very important to go deeper into how decisions are made in an organization. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging Enlightened, and they're going there, is that they not stop at healthcare professionals, but they bring on board all sorts of different subject matter experts that include the people who ultimately make a decision. Now, in a healthcare organization, it could be physician-led, healthcare professional driven, but it may be that you're really selling to the CFO or to the CEO. And you ought to know that. You need to know within the organization who are the decision makers, and then you need to know how they think. Now, the other thing is that thought leadership is really, really important. So having key opinion leaders help you matters. I can tell you, real basic things. When I hear people talk about gaps in care, you can't have a conversation about value-based care and not talk about gaps in care. And I hear someone refer to hemoglobin A1C as something other than hemoglobin A1C. It makes me think that this person isn't that close to the clinical problems that I'm trying to solve. Isn't that crazy? That whether or not you say hemoglobin A1C versus something else is going to make me think about you, but it matters. Speaking the language of the people you're trying to work with matters. And so understand their language and understand every morning what they're waking up with and trying to solve, and understand what their current workflows are so that you don't build the perfect solution that no one will ever use. Because remember, if there's no adoption, there will be no disruption. Everyone wants to disrupt healthcare. Let me tell you, I've been doing this for 25 years. Really hard to disrupt healthcare. Do I think it needs to happen? Yes. Do I think it will happen by someone who develops this awesome system that no one will ever use? No. Next slide, please. All right, and this is just, again, to reiterate the whole concept of really understanding who the people are that you're trying to solve the problem for and what they think about daily. Next slide, Jen. All right, I said that I would end here on offering some suggestions, some tips. Take them for what they are. But let's get into how to really engage folks here. Next slide, please. Okay, engage early and often. This is something I learned from Athena, and I learned from the whole world of medical technology. And that is that this is an iterative process. In fact, when I was at Athena in the early days, back in 2015 and 2016, we used to have sort of a roadmap. It was a waterfall. We had all of these things that we were going to get done in that fiscal year. And then guess what? By the end of the fiscal year, everything had changed. And so appropriately, Athena went through an important process of converting to the agile method of building technology. And I learned a lot from that process. It's constantly coming back and making sure that you're solving the right problems. And again, here, you got the doctor telling you about agile. For people who are out there who are technologists, I apologize in advance. But this is an iterative process, It is an agile process, and that is the way you must address it. So engage early and often, and then I'm going to throw in there one last time, make sure that you're getting diversity of opinion, because you've got to walk a mile in their shoes. You have to do it. There is no way around it. Make sure you understand their reality. Don't build a solution for the reality as you'd like to see it. Next slide. Capture multiple perspectives. This is where I essentially tell you that as Chief Medical Officer, in some ways I'm a liability to you, okay? Because at a certain point, I may not have my finger on the pulse. I just may not be close enough to it. So you have to, and I think what good leaders do, I'm not even going to be so specific to say chief medical officers, but what good leaders do, maybe even great leaders, is that they're interested in multiple perspectives, okay? They're really good at facilitating conversation, bringing in diverse perspective, and then from that, creating a narrative, a strategy, and then most importantly, an execution plan. So please, think about this, okay? Forget about trying to build technology. This is just a great way forward as a leader, and something that I try to do, sometimes successfully, other times not quite so successfully, but really getting multiple perspectives is fundamental. Next slide, please. And I'll end here. Now, I wish I'd learned this a lot earlier in my career, which is the key to happiness is mostly about managing your expectations. Now, I'm not quite ready to teach that to my children who are teenagers and to say to them, hey, have the appropriate expectations here about life. You'll be happier. But I think it matters. I think to a certain extent, your job is to manage expectations. And so that means you need to do a couple of different things. You need to really understand what's the problem you're trying to solve, how you're going to get there, and then make sure you communicate. I, like many, have learned that lesson only too often, that as soon as I think that I have done a really good job of communicating, I need to do it like 10 times more. So, well, someone's laughing there, and it sounds like the laugh of I've made that mistake too. But you can't communicate enough, and you can't connect with people enough, and you can't engage enough to really understand where people are coming from. And when you do this well, I think outcomes are better. And with that, I am now going to end. I don't know how much time I spent there. I hope it wasn't too much. And I'm going to hand it over to Dyan.
Yes, and you heard me. That was me giggling because, yes, I can definitely relate. Kevin said a few things that were really, I guess, really hit home with me. And certainly, I do work also with technology companies to bring technology into patient engagement to be able to scale up programs. And I have definitely learned the importance of that single sign-on. And if I work with a technology company that says they can't do it, ooh, the client's not really happy. But also about engaging patients early and often. And I, like you, Kevin, I have learned about the agile process. I came from pharma. Pharma is not agile. And over the last few years, I've really learned about that process and how important it is to keep going back to learn about, how things can evolve. So I guess, Jen, if you can go to the next slide, please. And I am going to focus on the patient. You can go to the next slide. So I am all about making the patient, putting the patient at the center of the business. And I even launched a brand globally where we did nothing for patients, and I can't even think of that happening today. The FDA, thankfully, is also trying to get us to put the patient at the center. And they've gotten tired of saying to drug companies and device companies, you have to include patients in your development, and encouraging them to do it. You have to make your clinical trials more diverse. So finally, over the last 2 years, the FDA has developed and finalized guidance. The industry listens to guidance. That's law to us. So the first I will go over is patient-focused drug development. And all that says is that patients should be involved in drug and device development from pre-IND all the way through to commercialization. This means, well, I don't know if you know, but only 11% of all clinical trials actually get completed. And many times they're not completed because of the barriers that are put in place in terms of the patient's participation. So what the FDA is trying to do is get you to collaborate with people early on in terms of developing a protocol, co-creating a protocol, and then collecting real world data during the course of a clinical trial. So it's not just safety and efficacy, it's also behavioral data so that you have a better understanding of what's going on with the patient in the real world. And then once the drug and device is out in the market, certainly collecting that data. So again, understanding what's going on in the real world. And then finally, looking at enhancing diversity in clinical trials. It's almost obvious that this should be the case, but it's not in practice. And usually this is because the clinical research organizations, as well as the clinical operations folks, they have a pipeline. They're used to dealing with different organizations, usually highly academic centers, that are able to provide to them the recruitment that they need for their trials. But we've got to start thinking about this differently. In order to make these trials more diverse, the highly academic centers can't be the only place that you go. You have to start developing relationships with communities. You have to go into communities and work with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, organizations that really touch on the ecosystem, or part of the ecosystem of how we live. And you have to develop trust. And so you need to be there for the long haul. It's an investment in time. It probably takes a little bit longer than just going directly to the highly academic center. But in the end, you're going to get a product that is going to be able to reflect the diversity of opinion that you're going to get, diversity of data that you're going to collect, and you're going to make it more viable when it hits the real world. So you can go to the next slide. So let me tell you some examples of why you should be doing this. And I have two personal examples and one that is just current events. So I worked with a company on a rare disease company that couldn't understand why they were not enrolling in their clinical trial. And so they asked me just to take a look. And so the first thing I did was try to understand the prevalence of the disease. No one had told me the prevalence of this rare kidney disease was actually in the Black population. But they had placed, so as I peeled back the onion, I realized that they too fell in the same old habit. They placed their clinical trials in highly academic centers. And many of these centers are in places where there were no Black folks living at all. And I say that freely, being a Black person myself. So I proposed a program where we would put together the highly academic nephrologists with the community-based nephrologists. And we could get their enrollment up. Since this is a rare disease, the enrollment, phase 2 is usually where you can get the drug approved. So here's a company in phase 2, they're trying to enroll just 100 people. So I made a plan for them, worked with some community-based organizations, and we came back with a figure of $150,000 to execute this plan. Well, the company decided that that was more than they wanted to pay. They didn't value the diversity in their clinical trial enough to pay $150,000. So we said, okay. And they went away. They completed the enrollment for their trial, and they got their great safety and efficacy data. They took that data to the FDA. The FDA said, great safety and efficacy data. However, you don't have the right demographics. This is a disease that affects mostly Black people. You have 5 Black folks in your trial. You're going to have to go back and do your trial over. So now, today, 6 years later, that company is recruiting for that phase 3 trial. Instead of having the original 100 to enroll, now they have to enroll 300. That's a lot harder to do with a rare disease. And actually what I do see, though, that they have learned something. They have, in addition to the highly academic centers, they have supplemented those centers with putting sites into communities. And they are working actively with community-based organizations. But that's a pretty expensive lesson. Over 6 years, how much impact on outcomes could they have had? How much revenue did they miss? Because they decided to forego a $150,000 contract to get the right population in their clinical trial. The second is another rare disease company that is focused on an ultra rare disease. Maybe the prevalence is about 400 people in the US, maybe 2,000 worldwide. The company had basically then a molecule was a syrup, and the syrup tasted horribly and smelled horribly. So the company was really focused on making a hard tablet that was enteric coated so that the patient experience was a positive one. They didn't have to deal with the smell and taste. Well, for a year, I railed against the R&D folks and said, please let me get you in front of, and let me get patients and caregivers in front of you before you go further. I bet you can learn something. And finally, after sitting in a meeting with Global Genes, and you should look that up, globalgenes.org, they finally heard, okay, Dyan, we get it. We should be listening to the patient, put together a meeting. So I put together a global meeting of patients and caregivers with stakeholders internally. And what they learned during the course of that meeting was that 80% of the patients that would be using the drug are on feeding tubes. That means that only 20% of the patients would be able to use the drug in its current form. So CMC went back and formulated and made up a new formulation that would be able to serve the entire population. What the company could have ended up with is a drug that really only served 20% of the population because they simply didn't ask the patient in the first place. The current example is COVID. COVID, as we all know by now, is really impacting the non-white population to a great degree. And this is not because of ethnicity or race, it's because of health disparities or functional disparities. Most of the clinical trials that are going on right now for both treatment as well as vaccines are not diverse. And there really is a challenge that in the end, the drug or vaccine that comes out to the market or is verified to work may not work in the populations that really need it the most. So there really needs to be an effort, and there now is an effort. It's starting to get screamed out by several medical organizations to really get companies to make sure they're getting their clinical trials to be more diverse. Can you imagine, here we are dealing with COVID, and we end up with a vaccine or treatment that doesn't work in the population that's getting hit the worst. So this is why you really should listen to the patient. Thank you so much for that. So then I go hand this off to Shelli, I'm thinking.
Yes, thank you, Dyan, and thank you, Kevin, for really highlighting, so many of the distinct issues that, we face in getting true helpful solutions and innovations to market in the healthcare space. I think that Kevin and Dyan both really illuminated how important it is to engage experts and patients throughout the entire innovation life cycle. And that's why we created Enlightened. I've worked in healthcare for my entire career, and I've heard countless stories like the ones that Dyan and Kevin have told. And 96% of healthcare innovations fail. That's a huge rate. And what we want to see is better innovations coming to market and providing opportunities for better practice for clinicians and truly to impact outcomes for all patients. And we can do better. And I think that the reason why we created Enlightened was to advance healthcare innovation. And by doing so, we pulled together a very diverse invitation-only network of the best and brightest minds of healthcare. Again, I think that in many aspects of healthcare, we're still going to the same people to source their opinions, to source information, right? We have the same 5 key opinion leaders for every different type of specialty. And ultimately, we need to dig deeper. We need to understand how diverse patient populations are being treated. And to do that, we need to engage a diverse set of experts. And so we created the Enlightened Network, really focusing on really tapping into that diversity of opinion and tapping into diversity of people, clinicians that are practicing in different geographic locations, those that are practicing at different types of settings, community hospitals, critical access hospitals, academic medical centers. you really need to source information from many different people to have a true understanding of how to impact healthcare. And as Dyan had mentioned, you know, if you're just going to source opinions from academic medical centers, you're missing a huge part of the patient population. And so we really tried to pull together a diverse set of experts, you know, covering 40+ medical specialties, spanning experience levels. You know, as Kevin had mentioned, it can be great to engage a CMO of a business or a CMO of a hospital, but you know, that's likely not the only opinion that you need. You need to dig deeper. And for us, you know, we really want to focus on clinicians who are treating a diverse patient population across the globe. And by bringing this network together, we hope to offer truly on-demand expertise to not only advance healthcare innovation, but to facilitate that responsible disruption as well. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And then, you know, just to wrap up a little bit about our model, you know, we leverage technology to do this. We really wanted to deliver a transparent experience. A lot of the ways that these type of expertise is garnered today is really done with a black box around it. Ultimately, you know, a lot of companies will go to typical expert networks to try to find healthcare expertise. They're not really aware of who they're going to end up talking to. It's not clear who's being paid what. And really, clinicians are not empowered, and neither are the companies that are searching for the expertise. And so we're trying to disrupt that model by, again, offering a diverse set of experts for curated and on-demand expertise as well. And so, you know, we're very transparent about our rates in terms of interactions, and we want to give people access to the most quality expertise so that we can essentially advance healthcare innovation. And then Jen, you can go to the next slide. And then this is just an overall infographic of the Enlightened model and how our solution is designed to work. You know, we're very excited to launch into this market, and we hope that, you know, we can look at that 96% number in the future, and that, you know, Enlightened and everyone coming together to impact healthcare innovation for the better, we can bring that number down. We can also make sure that we're engaging more diverse communities and bringing better solutions to light for healthcare. And that is all.
Shelli, Dyan, Kevin, that was absolutely tremendous. I learned so much in listening to you guys, and have a couple of pages of chicken scratch here. Folks on the line who have dialed in, please feel free to type your questions either into the chat or into the Q&A box. Also, if you'd like to use the raise your hand function, I'd be happy to call on you. While you all grapple with those many options, I actually have a question myself that I'm going to sneak in while I can. I'm curious, you know, Kevin, you talked about sort of the frustration of, you know, clinicians as these sort of innovations land on your desk for consideration, or perhaps worse, implementation, where, you know, you simply haven't been involved and the burden for you hasn't been acknowledged during the development process. Dyan, you gave some mind-blowing examples around how sort of failure to engage sort of before we even get to diverse populations, but any populations of patients can be sort of catastrophic. And Shelli, you sort of, starting with 96% of healthcare innovation fails. My question for you guys is, why is it so hard to drive home the message that there really is a strong value proposition in doing this engagement? Why is that so challenging, especially when I think of our tech colleagues who, you know, I always think of being, you know, like, very keen to test their product and do user testing. Why is it so challenging in healthcare? And curious around how each of us can take on sort of responsibility for trying to sort of drive home that message. Oh, Kevin, I think you might be on mute.
Okay.
All right, guys, it's not a Zoom call until someone starts talking. Right? Officially now we can check the box that this is a Zoom call because I was answering.
My favorite is, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No one can hear you.
All of the jokes are true. It's funny because it's true. Okay, so what I started to say is, it is really mind-boggling and at the same time alarming that so many different hardworking, intelligent entrepreneurs start off and don't really get anchored into the problems that need to be solved. What frequently happens, in my experience, is that they have been successful in another sector, and now they want to get into healthcare for really, really important mission-driven reasons. The problem is we are a very different animal in healthcare. We're a different animal because of the regulation. We are a different animal because of HIPAA. We are a different animal because healthcare professionals are different animals. So they come into this and they have every expectation that whatever success that they've had in a different sector is going to famously work in ours. Now, sometimes they're not wrong. Oftentimes they are. The ones who navigate it best are the ones who do exactly what we've been advocating for, which is to get a lot of reach into problems that people are trying to solve. They're willing to go and walk, I mean, literally follow these people around to figure out what type of problems they're trying to solve. For those people, they generally get a good sense for a problem. They continue to iterate and they build something that's useful in collaboration with doctors. So, or whatever healthcare professional it may be. Now, what I would say is it's just really hard to get there. I feel like I'm this API that doesn't get used enough. You know, now techies, I'm using your language, aren't I not? But I'm like that API between the guy who understands healthcare and the guy who understands a little bit about technology. But how do you plug me in, right? And that's what I feel like my friends who are in healthcare just don't get an opportunity to do. They want to influence technology such that it'll, number one, solve the problems that they care about. Number two, fit their workflow. But they don't know, they're here in Boston. They're not even aware of these companies. How could they be? So you need a platform that brings these folks together and says, hey, look, here's a way for you guys. It's like a dating platform, right? Like, we're just going to go out on a few dates. It just might be a couple of hours of consultation that could then turn into something more meaningful, like a more long-term engagement, or even having someone sit on your board, or even joining the company, who knows? But you don't have to commit to that up front, right? Like, that's what I felt was necessary. So that when Shelli, and I should mention Michelle Higginson, came to me and said, hey, we've got this idea. I was like, you know what, that makes sense to me. Like, that is something that this world needs. I want to live in a world that has that type of platform that puts people together, people who independently are frustrated and together could change the world. So that's what I think is necessary. That's why you find me here on a Wednesday, 11:48 Eastern time, spending time, because I think it matters. And so let's stop this foolishness. We've seen too many people do it. You know, and I think we're kind of all collectively wrong together. So let's get together and kind of collectively be somewhat right.
I will underscore exactly what Kevin said. I've actually had the experience of having folks from technology sectors search me out because they've had such a hard time breaking into healthcare. They've built this incredible platform and they don't understand why it's not getting any traction. And I'm usually the one who's translating to help them understand this is what the industry is, this is what it may be looking for, but they have to spend some time to really get to know healthcare a bit, even when they brought the Holy Grail. So I agree, asking a lot of different people, talking, and really knowing that just one person that you learn to trust is not enough. You need to talk to some people who don't like your idea, as well as people who support you fully, so that you get the a full range of opinions and perspectives. And again, this industry is so highly regulated and it's not agile. We're used to saying that, thank you, this is the thing that we have, and this is what it's going to look like for the next 365 days. Technology looks at this differently. If there's something wrong in 2 weeks, you want to change it. So you got to also hear that that's probably your customer's voice. Hear that in your customer's voice that they have challenges too, but get to know their environment to understand that. But gradually they'll learn from you as well.
I'll just pile on really quickly to what Dyan said. You know, in speaking to people that don't like your idea, I think that, you know, Jen, as you had mentioned, you're aware of, you know, companies that do the UX testing and they talk to people. The problem is, I think they underestimate the sheer number of people they need to talk to. You can't just get one yes or one person who likes what you're doing. You have to keep going. You have to talk to people that think your idea is terrible, because they might be able to give you some insight into how you can make it better. Because we're not just, you know, we're not launching solutions to one person. We're trying to launch into change healthcare. And so it is so important to, you know, even when you think you've sourced enough opinions, take it a step further. Talk to 5 more people. And like Kevin had mentioned, you know, like the online dating field, you know, you have to kind of, you have to talk to a lot of people to know what you like. What's your type?
It's so funny listening to you. One of the things I always sort of reflect on when we talk about healthcare, as an industry, I'm going to break into healthcare. You know, what is it? A 3 something trillion-dollar industry a year. You know, when I think to myself, that's bigger than the GDP of France, right? This is not a, you know, this is not just a very complex, this is not just a highly regulated industry, it's absolutely enormous. So the idea, Shelli, sort of riffing off what you said, you know, talking to 3 people probably isn't enough, especially as you think about, and, you know, Dyan, correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but there are 50 million people in the US. And even if you are not a patient today, you may become one, and you likely have someone in your life who you love very much who is a patient today. Again, just the enormity and the diversity and the complexity. I'm going to try and get some of you guys to help me a little bit with something I wrestle with. And Kevin, you brought up the sort of the horse and car analogy, and also the issue of sort of clinical workflows. I'm constantly experiencing this sort of pull and tug. I get upset because there are so many things that we have to improve upon in healthcare. And, you know, while sort of the traditional sort of blow it all up, I know isn't the way forward, you know, there's a tension for me between working within existing clinical workflows that are broken, both for the clinician, both for society because of the cost, and for the patients who are experiencing them, and sort of having more aggressive or lofty goals. And I'm curious if you guys sort of have thoughts around, you know, how audacious we should be when we start engaging these individuals, and how audacious we should be when we think about innovating.
I'm always about pushing the envelope. So I say go big, be as audacious as you can. I think COVID has taught us that too. You can look at the healthcare industry and what it would accept and expect 6 months ago versus where it is now. I mean, how many doctors were reticent to even do telehealth? And we had the regulations in place to restrict it. And now it's all hands. So you never know how the environment's going to change if you push hard enough. COVID has helped us recognize a lot. And so I say push the envelope. I mean, even with me, with patient engagement, about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, the industry wasn't ready to hear that you should really they were talking the talk of putting the patient at the center. Now COVID has flipped that on its ear, and they now know, oh my God, my clinical trials have stopped because I don't really engage with patients. I can't do first patient starts because I really don't know who that patient is. So I was ready when the industry finally woke up. So be audacious, push it.
Yeah, I'm a doctor. I'm not on mute anymore, right, guys? Because
no, you're good.
No, I think you're right. Like sometimes you just have to be. Well, look, if you're going to have very big, audacious goals, and you should, they just have to be anchored into something that's real. Otherwise, you're tone deaf. And so you know, the COVID experience has been one of the most fascinating in my career. I'm sure for all of us, it's been unlike anything else we've ever experienced in our career. But I would say that, you know, from crisis, you know, that old concept of from crisis comes opportunity. I've seen that, you know, within our organization. We are a big organization. 250,000 people in the United States across 9,300 stores, support centers, call centers, warehouses, and whatnot. And it was encouraging how we could come together and make decisions at pace and really quickly impact our business. We had to. We had no choice. Back in the early days of this, when some folks were able to go into sort of lockdown and figure it out, we were essential and we had to make it happen. That meant that every day we had to identify what are the most mission critical things we need to solve for. What is the context of those things? Let's have a robust decision around those things. And then let's end by deciding. And we moved our business fast. And that has been really, really encouraging. The other thing we did is, to Dyan's point, we listened to our customers, right? Our customers wanted us to give them options to keep them safe, which at times meant coming to our store. So we had to make sure that that was a safe experience, but at times meant really leveraging our drive-throughs, curbside pickup, and digital. That will change our business for the better. So from crisis comes opportunity. This is a great moment to try to innovate. But again, it really does start with listening to the problems that need to be solved. What's the context in which you're trying to solve them? And then what can you get done at pace?
Fantastic. And what I love listening to you guys is, you mentioned good leadership earlier, Kevin, and I think that, I really enjoyed today because I think the three of you sort of demonstrate great leadership. Kevin, as a sort of healthcare leader who's open to getting feedback and is truly listening in the work that you do. And Dyan and Shelli, through what you lead, Diana Inspired, making it easier to get sort of patients voices, diverse patient voices, input. And Shelli, of course, what you've launched, and congratulations to you and Michelle with Enlightened. Before I close out for the day, Shelli, I'd like to give you a second to talk about our partnership between Enlightened and Dime and the access that our members now have to the Enlightened platform.
So, Dime and Enlightened have similar missions in, advancing healthcare innovation, and we really loved getting to learn more about Dime's missions and their focus. And so we are delighted to offer Dime members actually 60% off of the annual Enlightened subscription fee. And, we would love to get any Dime members that are interested in working with Enlightened or sourcing expertise through Enlightened to reach out, and we'd love to tell you more about our platform and the opportunity that we offer. And we're just really, really excited to partner with Dime on this initiative.
Fantastic. So we'll be getting all of that information along with the recording and slides from today up onto the website in the next few days. Everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being part of this really important conversation. Shelli, Dyan, and Kevin, thank you for your time today. And as I said, three great leaders in the field. One quick housekeeping note before we break, if I can, just to highlight one of our upcoming events. So on August 13th, so next week, we have Sarah Gerke and Timo Minson coming to talk about their publication in Nature Digital Medicine. They have been examining Germany's digital health reforms and thinking specifically about how we can learn from them here in the US. So everyone, thank you for joining today. Shelli, Kevin, Dyan, thank you again. Thank you for your leadership in the field, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.